And if you decide to protest him for any reason, you will be on camera. So don't worry, this is BC.
Go for the introduction, Elliot.
This is BC. We're professional. That's how it works. Anyway, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming here. I really appreciate it. My name is Elliot Hamilton. I am in the very interesting position of being the vice president of both the Federalist Society and the Health Law Society. And as a JD-MPH candidate, that's supposed to make some amount of sense, but nevertheless, the reason why we're here today is because we have a remarkable opportunity to speak to two very, very intellectually gifted individuals talking about a very, very heated topic. And that would be the question of government role in healthcare. As a result, we decided to have this event at the very end of the semester, as a lot of the 1Ls are going through con law. You all read the Sebelius case and wanted to try to get that entire conversation here with two individuals who are extraordinarily qualified to discuss this issue. So immediately to my right, we have Josh Blackman, who is an associate professor of law at South Texas College of Law in Houston, who specializes in constitutional law in the United States Supreme Court and the intersection of law and technology. He is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Unprecedented, A Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. Josh was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. He has testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He clerked for the Honorable Danny J. Boggs of the Circuit Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and for the Honorable Kim Gibson of the U.S. District of the District Court of the Western District of Pennsylvania. He is a graduate of George Mason University School of Law, now known as Antonin Scalia Law School.
Not Antonin Scalia School of Law.
No.
Do you know what the acronym for that is, right?
Yes. Yes.
Antonin Scalia School of Law.
Yeah, we're not doing that one here. And then over to my right, we have our very own Professor Marianne Cherba, who holds a bachelor's degree in biology from Colgate University and graduated from BC Law magna cum laude. She holds a doctorate in science and health policy and law, as well as a master's in public health from the Harvard School of Public Health. She's the lead author of Healthcare Reform, Law and Practice, a comprehensive guide to the Affordable Care Act and its implementing regulations, which was also co-authored by Professor Nobel, who was kind enough to join us today. Professor Cherba holds a joint faculty appointment at Tufts Medical School through the joint JD-MPH program with BC Law, which, thank you. I appreciate all that you do for all of us JD-MPHers here. And she is also an adjunct professor at law at NYU Law School. With Professor Noble, Dr. Cherba has published and spoken extensively on the Affordable Care Act, and she has published numerous articles and invited to present at the World Stem Cell Summit and other domestic and international conferences on FDA and international regulation of adult stem cell therapies and regenerative medicine. It is an honor and a privilege to have both of you here to discuss this topic. We're going to try balancing out about close to 20 minutes each. And without further ado, Professor Blackman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Boston College. It's my first time here, my first time meeting Professor Cherba. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My talk today will be based on my book, which was published last year. You can buy a copy if you like, called Unraveled: Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. And in this book, I try to tell the story of healthcare reform over the last few decades. And truly, the story begins not with the Affordable Care Act, but with President Clinton and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, most of you probably weren't born when this happened, and it was increasingly true, but in 1993, after the inauguration, President Clinton assigned his wife, First Lady Hillary Clinton, to chair a task force on healthcare reform. And this yielded a proposal that became known as Hillary Care, which wasn't single payer, it wasn't some sort of a national healthcare system, but it would ensure that all Americans have access to health insurance, that people would get what they call a health security card. This bill did not go anywhere. Through a series of advertisements called the Harry and Louise ads, people were afraid of a government takeover of health insurance. And they were worried that if government gets between people and their doctors, it will be very bad. And the theme of these commercials was very simple. People liked the insurance they had, and they didn't want to lose it. If you look at polls before the ACA, the overwhelming majority of people who had insurance, liked insurance they had. It's almost 80%. However, the people who didn't have insurance weren't so happy. So you see this very sharp dichotomy. Those who were insured were generally happy. Those who were uninsured or couldn't get insurance were the ones who were unhappy. And this creates an inherent problem, right? Insurance can't be everything to all people. There's something called a trilemma. That is, there are three different tugging directions for insurance to think about. You can achieve three values with insurance. It can be affordable, is it cheap, right? It can be comprehensive, does it cover lots of stuff? Or it can be accessible, that is, anyone can get a policy. I'll give you two of these, I can't give you three. So if it's really cheap insurance, it's not going to be very comprehensive. If it's very comprehensive, it's probably not going to be cheap. And if anyone can access this policy, regardless of their own health conditions, it's not going to be affordable, right? So you can give you two, but you can't get all three of these. And these trade-offs are things that people generally don't understand. Now, the Affordable Care Act was sold on a promise that was repeated dozens and dozens of times by its supporters. That if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. The reason why this promise was made and was so important was to put people at ease, saying, look, if you have insurance, you get to keep what you have, it won't affect it. This was never going to be the case. The Affordable Care Act was designed in large part to get people off these cheap, bare-bones plans that perhaps they liked, maybe it wasn't good for them down the road, but they would not be able to keep these sorts of plans. No matter. Let's fast forward to 2009. President Obama won the election. Democrats won the House. Democrats won the Senate. And at the time in the Senate, there were 60 Democratic votes. It became very clear the Republicans were not going to cooperate with Democrats in health care reform, so the Democrats said, we will go it alone, we will pass this with 60 votes. That was a very important decision. And they voted in December of 2009 on a bill known as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. The bill is nearly 3,000 pages long. I doubt any members of Congress actually read the entire bill. This is the world we live in. People don't read long bills. It's too difficult. In fact, Senator Max Baucus, who chaired the Finance Committee, admitted, I didn't actually read the Affordable Care Act bill. Okay. But then something happened, which involves your home state. That summer of 2009, Senator Ted Kennedy passed away. He was replaced by Governor Patrick with a Democrat holdover, just to fill the seat for a while, and then a special election was held. Much to the surprise of America, a Republican in Massachusetts won an election. His name was Scott Brown. You probably remember him.
An alum of BC Law School.
An alum of BC Law School, thank you. And Scott Brown ran on the platform of being the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. Once Scott Brown was elected, the Democrats no longer had a filibuster-proof majority. They couldn't pass it through a straight party line vote, which created something of a dilemma. The bill they voted on in December of 2009 was never meant to be the final version of the bill. It was mostly like a test vote, right, to see if everyone was on the same page. The real action was supposed to happen in the House. The House would take all the tough steps to make the bill better. But because they no longer had a filibuster-proof majority, the House couldn't make all the changes they wanted. And this then fell to Speaker Pelosi of how to manage it. And through a series of procedural wranglings I won't bore you with, the Democrats managed to pass the bill in the House on what's almost a straight party line vote. You can see not a single Republican voted for in the House, and indeed 34 Democrats voted against in the Senate. The vote of 290 to 210 was a very close vote. If you look at major landmark legislation in the United States, it's very, very rare for such a big bill to be passed with such a narrow margin of error. If you look at Social Security, Americans with Disabilities, Civil Rights Act, there's bipartisan support. But from the outset, there was zero support for the Affordable Care Act from conservatives. Now, there's a couple ways you can look at this. You might say, Josh, wait a minute. Republicans are being intransigent. Why wouldn't they get behind this law? It's going to help people. Okay. The flip side is, why would they? They didn't run on this. The constituents didn't really want it. and was unpopular. And in fact, the law only peaked above 50% popularity about a year ago after Trump was elected. So this decision to go alone, I think, corrupted healthcare reform for generations to come. And this actually makes me sad. Any decision about healthcare reform now becomes partisan. Science, policy, things that actually matter take second nature to politics. And I think a lot of it stems from this decision to go it alone. Now, we have it, we're with Obamacare, I'll talk about it, but this was an important choice back in 2010. Goes to the president's desk to sign it. President Obama uses about 23 separate pens. What he does, he takes a little bit, one pen for a stroke, one pen for a stroke, one pen for a stroke, and he hands the pens out as souvenirs. So they sign the bill in a very deliberate fashion. Okay, so President Obama signed it, and he must be thinking, okay, this is great. We have ACA, this is going to be wonderful. Not so fast. The first major challenge concerned whether the law was constitutional. In particular, did the law's individual mandate work? Now, the core component of the ACA is the mandate. In fact, this was something learned from your experiment in Massachusetts. If you ensure that people can access insurance without concern for pre-existing conditions, people might just wait to be insured. They'll only get insurance when they're sick. So the idea of a mandate is we will force people to buy insurance right away, and if they don't, we'll penalize them. That is, there's an incentive to remain insured. Now, I think it's probably okay for Massachusetts to adopt it as part of the state police power. But it's a different story when we're talking about the powers of the central government. That is, does Congress have the power to mandate that people buy an economic product? Now, this was the subject of my first book, Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. And I have to admit, when I was a recent law school grad in 2010, I said, of course Congress can make people buy insurance. Why couldn't they? I really hadn't considered it much. But over the intervening years, an argument began to develop that Congress lacked this power. And it goes like this. Congress may have the power to regulate economic activity, but they don't have the power to force you to engage in economic activity. That is, if you're already buying insurance, they can tell you what to buy. But if you don't want to buy insurance, they can't shove you into the stream of commerce. And this entire case was reduced to a single piece of broccoli, right? Can Congress make you buy broccoli? Now, it's not going to make you eat broccoli. No way. They're not going to make me put that in my mouth. I don't eat broccoli anymore. No, thank you. It's actually true. Because of this case, I can't eat broccoli anymore. I think of the decision in NFIB versus Sibelius to become sick. So I don't eat broccoli anymore. But can they make you buy it, right? If you buy broccoli, maybe you'll be healthier, and government healthcare costs will decrease. Okay? Ultimately, though, the court decided to uphold the mandate in its Sibelius decision. But it did it on a slightly different ground. It said, a matter of course, Congress can't make you buy health insurance, but they can tax you for going uninsured. This was Chief Justice Roberts' saving construction, right? Congress can't make you buy insurance, but they can tax you for going uninsured. As a result, the ACA's mandate was saved from constitutional challenge. I was not a fan of the decision, hence my decision not to eat broccoli anymore, but this is where we are. After the Sibelius decision, it shifted back to the political arena, and another Massachusetts great, Mitt Romney, was running for president. And he ran the platform of repealing and replacing Obamacare. Now, the irony, of course, is that as governor of Massachusetts, he signed into law Romneycare. Romneycare was basically the progenitor of Obamacare. Now, again, state, federal, no one cares the difference. In fact, Jonathan Gruber, our favorite economist from across the river, advised Romney on how to build Romneycare, and then advised Obama on how to build Obamacare. So there's a lot of ironies with this entire case. Mitt Romney was possibly the worst candidate in the world to run against Obamacare. During the debate, President Obama told Romney that you are the godfather of Obamacare. You know what? He was right. Romney lost the election. And with that, I thought, well, you know what? President Obama is a second term of office. Looks like Obamacare is going to be pretty strong footing going forward. I was very, very wrong. Now, I want to pivot to another aspect of the ACA, which is conscience, religious liberty. When the ACA was being debated, one of the biggest debates concerned abortions, as always, right? Would this new law fund abortions? There was a pro-life Democratic caucus that was very important. And Speaker Pelosi recognized unless she had these pro-life Democrats, she would not pass the bill. So President Obama signed an executive order saying, look, we're not going to change any funding for abortions. That was enough to get the votes of these pro-life Democrats. Okay, and they held up the executive order, wasn't worth the paper it's written on. But that's not the important point. The big religious liberty issue actually concerned something that didn't get much attention. It was called the Women's Health Amendment by Senator Mikulski of Maryland. Now, who can oppose something called the Women's Health Amendment? Okay. So the Women's Health Amendment said that the employers must provide, quote, preventive care for women. Preventive care for women. You know, what would that mean? Maybe a mammogram, cervical cancer screenings, right? But how did the Obama administration interpret preventive care? They interpreted it to mean contraception. The entire range of FDA-approved contraception. Everything from the condom to the diaphragm to various emergency contraceptions. Now, under the ACA, employers of a certain size were obligated to provide this to their employees. The statute didn't have any carve-out for religious freedom because the statute said nothing about contraception. So the law, as it stands, says if you're an employer, you're required to give your employees contraception for that additional cost. This was an actual commercial put out by the Colorado government to encourage people to sign up. And let me just read it to you. It says, "Got insurance. Let's get physical. OMG, he's hot. Let's hope he's as easy to get as his birth control."
Who did this?
It was a Colorado government organization. It says, my health insurance covers the pill, which means all I have to worry about is getting between the covers. I got insurance, okay? But the problem with this was who is going to be paying for the contraception. So under the original version of the mandate, there were several iterations of this. The only groups that were exempt were churches. If you were a religious nonprofit, for example, the Little Sisters of the Poor, you were required to pay for the morning after pill for your employees. Saying, Josh, wait, why would none do the morning after pills? They have nurses, right? They have custodians. They have various employees who are not taking vows of celibacy. So the first version was all non-churches must pay for this. That was a big blow. They said, okay, fine. The nuns won't have to pay for it, but they will have to certify on a form that someone else can cover the cost. For-profit corporations like Hobby Lobby, for example, were required to pay for it. This led to a significant amount of litigation, which I'll get to in a minute. But I need to pivot back to politics. So I told you a minute ago that my belief was after Mitt Romney lost the election, the repeal of Obamacare would end and people would move on with their lives. I was very wrong about that. My home state senator, Senator Ted Cruz, who went to the law school across the river, that other one in Cambridge, right? He went on a mission in the summer of 2013, urging Congress to defund Obamacare. And he toured the country, riling people up, saying, you need to stop Obamacare, you need to defund it. The problem with this approach is that Obamacare couldn't be defunded. The law has what's called a permanent appropriation. It's not subject to an annual appropriation. Even if Congress had appropriated zero money for Obamacare, it would have continued without any interruption. So this entire strategy had no chance of success. But the harder point is, why would President Obama sign into law a bill that defunds Obamacare? It was not going to happen. And indeed, Ted Cruz, who gave a 24-hour filibuster on the Senate floor, which he read a Dr. Seuss book to his daughter as a goodnight story. Right? It was a great story, but it didn't go anywhere. All it led to was Republicans digging in, saying we're not going to fund Obamacare, and we had a government shutdown. Now, Cruz didn't filibuster into a shutdown. The shutdown actually happened a week after the filibuster. But as a result, all government parks shut down. There was a huge stir, you might recall, where the vets, the honor flights, would go to the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C., and they said it was closed. So they picked up the barricades, they threw them across the streets. If the shores of Normandy won't stop them, some stupid barricades won't stop them. But this was a very short-lived success, defeat, however you want to put it, because eventually Republicans do what they always do, they caved. And eventually they funded the entire government. They actually eliminated various acts of sequestration which cut funding, and Obamacare was on its way. But not so fast. So you may recall the website, right? Everyone forgets the website. Healthcare.gov. This was a website designed to let people sign up. Unfortunately, it didn't work very well. And when this website launched, it was an absolute disaster. People couldn't use it, they couldn't register. Millions and millions of dollars were spent on a website that was utterly dysfunctional. It became something of a nightmare. Now, the president faced a very tough decision. What would they do if they couldn't get the website to work by the end of the year? They actually briefly considered shutting it down and just saying, okay, we'll do Obamacare next year. But instead, President Obama sent in the nerds. This was called the tech surge, right? You've heard of the surge in Iraq. This was the tech surge. Bringing all these experts on programming, these nerds from Google and Facebook, right? Who can build the website. You know what? They did. It actually worked. And within a month, they got the website up and running. But this only shielded from the next major controversy, which was cancellations. Notwithstanding the president's promise that you can keep your policy if you like it, it wasn't meant to be. The law actually required cancellation of non-compliant policies, and millions of Americans received these sorts of letters saying, your policy is canceled, go buy a new ACA policy. I didn't know this was a thing, but PolitiFact rates Lie of the Year. I think though President Trump will retire that award. How do you pick one, right? Yeah. But yeah, here we are, 2018. But this was deemed the Lie of the Year. Nonetheless, people started enrolling. People went down to the local Obamacare store. I don't know where the store is. There's an Obamacare store somewhere, but I guess you can get insurance there. Okay? And in the first year, roughly 8 million people signed up. The numbers have been trickling up slightly. It's somewhat plateaued this year because there's not much promotion, but now there's a significant number of Americans who are relying on the ACA. Okay. I want to talk briefly about the religious liberty cases. So the first one was called Hobby Lobby, right? This case concerned a private religious corporation. Now, Josh, how can a corporation have religion? Well, we have a statute called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. And this statute prevents the government from imposing burdens on free exercise. And the statute says the free exercise of persons. Aha! How does Congress define a person? Something called the Dictionary Act. In 1 U.S.C. 1, the very first section of the U.S. Code, a corporation can be defined as a person. So that part wasn't that controversial. The harder issue in Hobby Lobby was, does it burden your religion when you pay for someone else's contraception? Now, no one's forcing the owners of Hobby Lobby to take the birth control pill. They have to pay for it for someone else. And by a 5-4 decision, the court ruled that that does impose a substantial burden on the free exercise to make them pay for someone else's birth control. Okay? The second major case involved the nuns, the Little Sisters of the Poor. The religious nonprofits were in a slightly different position. They were not obligated to pay for birth control. They had to merely sign a form that authorized someone else to pay for it. I will not bore you with the details of ERISA. It's very complicated. But the short form answer is they objected to doing this, and they were authorizing sin. They were authorizing someone else to do something they didn't approve of. The court never actually resolved this dispute. Why? Justice Scalia passed away while this case was pending. And it became very clear, I was at the arguments, that there was not a 5-vote block one way or the other. So they basically said, well, let's send this back down to the lower courts and hope they can think about it. As it turned out, they sent it back down to the lower courts, and the unexpected happened. Donald Trump won the election. And with it, they basically withdrew the various restrictions on the Little Sisters. They gave them accommodations. They settled the lawsuits. So these cases went away. So the two major religious liberty cases are more or less wound down. But we are not out of the woods, right? Because what happens next? Even after President Trump was elected, this call to repeal and replace Obamacare did not end. There were several efforts to pass healthcare bills in Congress. Neither crossed a threshold in the Senate. In a very famous scene, Senator John McCain gave a thumbs down. They could not get to the threshold to proceed. However, they did do something very important. As part of the tax reform legislation, the very important tax reform legislation, Congress voted to set the penalty enforcing the individual mandate to $0. I said it again. They set the penalty to enforce the mandate to $0. Okay? The mandate was not repealed. The mandate actually still exists, at least for the time being. But the penalty is set to 0. As a result, people can now choose to go uninsured and not to fear any sort of federal penalty. Okay? This is the bill, right? It sets the penalty to $0. Now, what does this mean? And this will be my conclusion. I'll turn it over to Chairman in a minute. But what is the future then of the ACA if there's no mandate penalty? Well, first, states may actually impose their own mandates to buy insurance. Massachusetts has one, and several other states are considering as well. You have a state-imposed mandate. As well, states might start imposing additional requirements on what kind of policies must be issued if the Trump administration winds this stuff down. But then what do we have, right? If a person is not subject to a federal mandate, and they're not subject to a state mandate, they may choose to buy a cheap, bare-bones policy. It might not be the best insurance, but they may choose to buy something that's much cheaper. Who's going to continue buying Obamacare policies? People who actually need it, who can't get insurance otherwise. And I think what this does is it creates a two-tier track. A two-tier track where people who are sick, people who are poor, people who can't get insurance will use Obamacare. And there'll be lots of federal subsidies being paid out for these individuals. But for everyone else who doesn't need it, they'll go back to pre-Obamacare days. So we're actually in this unique position with a two-tier approach. Obamacare said, let's get everyone on the same level. But by killing the penalty, you get rid of that. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Let's just subsidize people who need it and let everyone else do what they need to do, right? It actually gives them more choice. Now, I don't know how sustainable this is. I am not a health policy expert. I can't be a Jonathan Grouper and give you all this number of stuff. But that, I think, is where we're headed with this two-tier approach. I wrote one book on the challenge to the mandate, a second book on the challenge to religious liberty and executive power, and I'll probably write a third book on how the Affordable Care Act is done or undone during the Trump administration. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to your comments later.
Thank
Is
you.
the food here?
Food is here.
All right, so we'll take a brief break. You guys get your food, and we'll reconvene in a minute to hear some comments.
We have it right here, so.
I wasn't like drinking.
Right on time.
Well, you know, I like lose my voice so easily. I was like, yeah. Hey, Alice.
You know about the litigation, don't you? What was that?
Might be a lot better. I'm sorry.
The Texas litigation.
Yep, thank you.
No, Texas filed a lawsuit. Texas filed a lawsuit about a month ago.
I feel like acid. I'm so happy.
At the who won jail Saturday?
Oh, you're yes. Brandon Sloan? Yeah.
I think kind of shows how
Got sad, got steak. It's kind of crazy. I was expecting like no pizza.
The government also argued as well. Maybe
I mean, I like to stop it, but we just should
I know. We like do that. I haven't done it yet.
there's still being a mandate with the
I didn't know I was doing a PowerPoint, but I got a PowerPoint. So that's okay.
Get the projection thingy to work.
You can get the projections.
What's up, boss? Thanks for coming.
Oh,
You can try. Wayne wasn't able to figure it out. Maybe you're
Wayne couldn't figure it out?
I'm paying to it too.
Professor, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
I'm going to cut him off. I feel like that's not a good place to land.
I think it's. That's really
I'm not really sure exactly. I feel like it would be better to like some of the herbal stuff.
I guess it's probably more common than bagels. Right?
It's a salad kind of.
Something like a true New Yorker.
Yeah, I want to like dig into that, but I don't know how to.
It's debatable if I'm going to count Rochester as New York.
But
Yeah, it's still going. It's taking a
Yeah.
break.
That's true.
I feel like it's lasagna, but there's no way where's this from? Mike, where you guys sitting?
yeah, I don't know.
I'm kind of sitting by myself in the corner. Yeah.
In there.
I don't know if there's like a backpack next to me. I don't see
I don't know how to get this I'm holding up a line now too.
Well, we're like setting it up as we go, you know?
Use a single fork.
Well, I argue that.
Yeah, that's not ideal.
Forks down here, so you're That's a good idea.
Fair trade.
I don't get this because like people are coming from there.
Is this? I just seen you guys were the last one, so I just went behind you.
I feel like we messed up.
I feel like you should be able to like put it in the middle and
Both sides. I think that's more.
I agree. Yeah.
But just wait.
Everybody's
I just pull it out of
Got it.
It's not a just so it's not fast. The rest of it goes by like even though it seems like it's like
I don't know what this is. It's all about this. Thank you for
Professor Nobel, you're going to join on this at the last minute?
Yeah, just 5 more minutes.
I don't know how much of the salad is going to be used, so I'm not going to get stingy about the salad. Oh, because you're not supposed to have the salad touch the hot food. That would be insane.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to get started while you nosh. All right. And I'm getting hungry. Anyway, hi, I'm Professor. I almost said I'm Professor Noble, because we do complete each other's sentences, and I might just drag her up, being a good friend that I am. Professor Noble and I each got involved in healthcare law because we're involved with healthcare for very personal reasons. And it seems to me that often lost from these discussions is that this is about healthcare. We're not talking capital gains taxes. We're not talking about tariffs on China. We're talking about healthcare. Professor Nobel and I got together as partners in crime at the Harvard School of Public Health. We've taught together, we've presented together. I wasn't quite aware, pardon me?
Hard to hear you back.
Oh, I wasn't quite aware that, is that better? Yeah. Okay. I wasn't quite aware that we'd be doing a PowerPoint today, but that's okay, because Professor Nobel and I have a million of them. So, first, a few preliminary comments. In terms of the lies of all time, Professor Trump, Donald Trump thinks that the Affordable Care Act was repealed with the act of Congress that zeroed out the individual mandate. That's not true. The Affordable Care Act is in effect. It's a little wobbly these days because of what's being done, but I think that Obama was wrong to say if you like your plan, you can keep exactly that plan. At least that's the message that many people took from his comment. But it's also wrong to say that getting rid of the individual mandate somehow repealed the entire law. It did not. And then let me just explain a little bit about what this law is. It is, again, signed into law in 2010. Its triple aims are access, quality, and control costs. It was never meant to reduce costs, but it was intended to control the rate of cost escalation. It's 10 titles. Yes, the original was 3,000 pages. The consolidated is 954 pages. And yes, Professor Nobel and I have read these pages. We need lives. And it would take 60+ votes in the Senate to repeal the law in its entirety, which is why most of the things that are being done now are formed in terms of things that can be passed as budget reconciliation measures. It is true that this law did not get passed with strong bipartisan support, with everybody holding hands and singing Kumbaya. But it is also true that last year's effort to repeal this law was constructed by 13 white gentlemen, and they wanted to get this out for vote before it was scored by the Congressional Budget Office, before it was debated, and before a single hearing was conducted. There were hearings on the ACA. So I offer that as a bit of context. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skip ahead. This refers to a video that Jimmy Kimmel had where he did man-on-the-street interviews and said, which do you like better, Obamacare or Affordable Care Act? And most people said, I love the Affordable Care Act, I don't like Obamacare. Why do you like the Affordable Care Act? Because affordable says it all. So anyway, they are one and the same. And the law is complicated, and wherever you stand in the political spectrum, this is a complicated law. Complicated laws are difficult to understand. Complicated laws are easy to become confused about. So what is the Affordable Care Act? It is not a government takeover. It took a very fragmented insurance market and maintained that fragmentation. It took a very fragmented scheme of regulatory oversight and maintained that fragmentation. And it took a fragmented healthcare delivery system and is trying to get that to be a bit more efficient. These ideas are rooted in correcting market failures. For right or wrong, we consign healthcare to the marketplace, just as we do for computers and Toyotas and things like that. But a market demands certain criteria to function effectively, and the healthcare market has numerous market failures. Most markets are imperfect, but the healthcare market is really imperfect. So what is the Affordable Care Act? It is an experiment. It had an 8-year implementation phase-in, and it is based on Massachusetts. Somebody wrote an article entitled Setting the Stage for National Reform, Massachusetts Healthcare in 2006. And so it is to be congratulated for taking every single healthcare idea, many of which hail from the Heritage Foundation, and trying to put them at work. And the mindset of the Affordable Care Act, and I know I sound like a cheerleader for the Affordable Care Act, and quite frankly, I am, and here's why. I got involved in healthcare policy when my son was in the neonatal intensive care unit, and I looked around and I thought, I don't know a damn thing about much. I cannot tell this woman what to do with her body. I cannot tell this man how to raise a child who's where the mom's been exposed to rubella, and this child will be deaf and blind and mentally retarded. I can't tell those people anything. But my big worry was that my son would grow up and not have health care insurance because he had the audacity to be born with a congenital heart defect. This isn't the stand-up comedian, this is the other son. My worry was that he would get well too soon and lose his bed in the NICU, and I thought that was a really stupid worry. And so that's what inspired me to go into this. And my son now, under the Affordable Care Act, has health insurance. He cannot be denied insurance because he had the audacity to be born with a pre-existing condition. He cannot be charged an astronomical premium, which he could never afford, which I could never afford to pay on his behalf. And if the Affordable Care Act goes away, well, at least Tom can live in Massachusetts, and hopefully we'll hold it together. But in the early 90s, when I started to study the public health sector, the Heritage Foundation was really, it's often attributed as the author of the individual mandate. It's not. The individual mandate comes out of an address that President Nixon delivered to Congress in 1971. And he talked about shared responsibility. And so it's an interesting exercise in framing context. The individual mandate immediately gives me an attitude. Who are you to tell me what to do? But when it was originally formed, it was individual responsibility, shared responsibility. So now I think of it as, why should I pay for your health care? And why should you pay for mine? If we are a country where we revere and we protect the individual, why should you pay for my health care? And yet if I choose not to get health insurance, and you choose to get health insurance, under pre-Obama days, you were cross-subsidizing my care. Why should you have to do that? So the individual mandate comes out of a sense of take care of yourself. Be responsible for yourself. Like it or not, you will be participating with a 99.5 level of confidence. You will be participating in the healthcare market. You will be generating healthcare costs. And if you get by without that, well, then somebody you love will not. And why should somebody pay for you to get health care just because you exercised your personal autonomy and chose not to get health insurance? And we are told to pay for a lot of things we don't want to pay for. I don't really want to fund many of the military actions we engage in. I don't want to pay for Scott Pruitt's cone of silence in his office. I don't want to pay for the Secretary of Housing's $30,000 desk, and yet I have to. So to the extent the Affordable Care Act is requiring us all to participate in some exercise of financing our health care, I think it's actually one of the milder things that our government asks us to do. This is how health care was financed before Obamacare, and you saw it was a blend of employer-sponsored coverage, which is how most people get their insurance and continue to get their insurance. Many people got it through Medicaid. Medicaid is the largest insurance company in the insurance program in the nation. Medicare is right up there, and many people were uninsured. The estimates of uninsured people were 42 million to 50 million at its worst. 50 million right before the Affordable Care Act took effect. And the reasons for uninsurance were not, I don't feel like getting it. The reasons were, I can't afford it. I lost my employer-sponsored insurance. I changed jobs, and I don't qualify. I can't get insurance. I could have, really be financially able to pay a very high premium, but I have this pre-existing condition, and my insurance company will not cover me. And the pre-existing condition could be pretty minor stuff. I mean, my son ran up about 100 grand in medical bills within the first 3 days of his life. But many people had much more minor pre-existing conditions, some of which had been corrected and were not going to come back, and yet an insurance company would deny them. Because, you know, odds are somebody with a pre-existing condition will cost more to insure. So under pre-Obamacare days, people face the problem of, I just can't get insurance, or I can't afford insurance, or I can't get a policy that's actually helpful to me. In terms of the ACA, the first aim was to deal with this problem. It was to expand and improve coverage. And you can see here, under pre-ACA days, there was a large number of uninsured, and there still is a significant percentage of uninsured people, but it has been reduced. And some people think that if the ACA were implemented more effectively, this number would come down by, say, 10 million people in the individual markets and 5 million people if all of the states participated in Medicaid expansion. It was also designed to improve ability to get coverage, but also restructure the individual market. And I will spare you you know, because I haven't had lunch, so I'm not going to take on explaining this chart. But the important thing to think about is if you have no insurance, people get care. Now, many people forego needed care because they don't have insurance. And then they tend to get very delayed care. My students have been harassed all term about the glories of EMTALA and the obligations of an emergency room to treat anybody who shows up, whether they can pay for it or not. Those costs don't evaporate. Those costs are passed on to people who have insurance, which is why I ask, why should I pay for your health care? Simply because you don't feel like getting health insurance, or under pre-ACA days, you couldn't get health insurance. So some health insurer decides, I don't feel like covering her, and here I am, some poor schlep who has insurance, and now I'm covering her. I'm cross-subsidizing her. But then people who do get insurance tend to get expensive care. So one health policy observer stated, well, we do provide care for people who don't have insurance. If someone has a heart attack, they don't sit in their apartment and die. P.S. many do. We pick them up in an ambulance, and we take them to the hospital, and we give them care. Now, does anybody have an idea of who the author of that statement is? It was Governor Romney on 60 Minutes when he was being interviewed during his run against President Obama. And I thought this was really interesting because Governor Romney had done Romney Care, which, you know, he kind of authored but kind of didn't. He sort of supported it, but then he vetoed parts of it after it passed, and carving a road for him to say, well, I support it if it looks good. Otherwise, I kind of vetoed parts of it if it turns out to be problematic. And he's certainly not the only politician who's done that. But also, Governor Romney's wife has multiple sclerosis, and she's doing great, knock on wood, may she always. But that's a chronic disease, so if she has an MS flare, no ambulance is coming to pick her up, and no ambulance is taking her to the ER. She'll have that chronic flare, and that will exacerbate unless and until she has insurance or can pay out of pocket. All right, so in terms of insurance, it is expensive, people do die, and the ACA tries to reform the insurance market. It will not allow annual caps on lifetime or annual services. It will insist on essential health benefits. Now, what that package should be is an issue, but it does require some kind of essential health benefits. 26-year-olds, many of you have been on your parents' employer plans longer, and your parents are doing the happy dance because I had to pay for one child who came off my plan when he was 21, and the others got to stay on, and it was a much smoother ride for all of us. Guaranteed issue means you have to be issued health care insurance. And you cannot be denied for a pre-existing condition, nor can you be charged more. So under the ACA, everybody is charged the same for the same benefits roughly. And there are two discriminating factors that allow some kind of differential pricing. One is age, and so insurers are allowed to charge up to 3 times more for older people than younger people because age correlates with higher health needs. And the other is tobacco use. But beyond that, community rating, guaranteed issue, and individual mandate. And if you don't have this, then what happens is people who are sick tend to buy health insurance if they possibly can because they need it. And people who are not sick tend not to buy health insurance or buy very, very skinny plans because they are thinking, I don't need health insurance. I don't want to pay for, higher premiums. If you're 28 years old and you're coming out of law school and you don't have a job and you have $200,000 in debt and you can't pay your rent, it is a rational decision from an economic point of view. A rational actor would choose to forego insurance. So what happens is if you get everybody in the pool and you get young people, or excuse me, not necessarily young, but healthy people cross-subsidizing less healthy people, that's when you spread risk and you can sort of moderate costs and bring it into an affordable bracket for most people. Okay, so now what the ACA does is it reforms the insurance market, especially regarding individual markets, where somebody has to go out and buy their own plan as opposed to getting a plan through their employer or getting their plan through Medicare or getting their plan through Medicaid. And shared responsibility, it is relying on the individual to kick in, it is relying on employers to kick in, which employers have basically willingly done for many years because it's the way to attract and keep talent. And then it helps people pay who cannot afford it. So it does this through a variety of Medicaid, Medicare, but it also provides subsidies to people who are making too much to qualify for Medicaid, are too young to qualify for Medicare, and do not have access to an employer-sponsored policy. If you are buying an individual plan, you don't have to buy through the exchange, but you can. And what the exchange is it's not issuing policies. So when people say, I bought an Obamacare policy, I'm on Obamacare. Obama never issued policies. It is an exchange. So if I go, I save my money and I want to buy 1 share of Facebook, I can go to the New York Stock Exchange or wherever it's traded and buy that share or a block of shares, but it's not coming from the exchange. The exchange is just facilitating that purpose, and that's what health insurance exchanges do. So basically, Medicaid expansion was a key piece of the ACA, and it stated to the states, listen, we want you to cover more people. We want you to cover more categories of people, but we will help you pay for it. We will pay the lion's share of it, 100%, and it'll dip down to 98%, and gradually it'll dip down to 90% federal reimbursement for covering these people. Now, like it or not, that was a key piece of how all of this would be financed. And what happened is in the Supreme Court in NFIB v. Sibelius, they decided that that was unconstitutionally coercive because if the state chose not to expand, the state would lose all of its funding for Medicaid, for everybody. And the court decided in a plurality decision that that was unduly coercive to the point of being unconstitutional. But what the Supremes did then is not just to strike down that portion of the statute, but say, hey, let's make it optional. Let's make it optional. So I'm not going to get a chance to go through all of these slides, but what happened with the Supreme Court deciding that it would be optional displayed a lack of true understanding of health economics and how you finance and deliver health care, how you deal with uncompensated care, how people have to cross-subsidize each other if people are not adequately insured. And in discussing Medicaid expansion, the justices made some interesting remarks. Justice Scalia stated, why should young and healthy people, and he was also stating this with regard to the individual mandate, why should young and healthy people have to buy insurance? The young people, you can tell I have an attitude about this, the young people don't need health care. They don't want health care unless, of course, they are buying a bottle of aspirin, and I'm almost quoting verbatim. To me, I think, okay, this man is out of touch because nobody buys aspirin anymore unless you need it as an anticoagulant when you get a little bit older. Or if you have the audacity to be born with a congenital heart condition, then you'll need it from, age 5 on. But his attitude was young people don't need health care. But the statistics do not support that. And what bothers me so much in many of the conversations around this is we lose sight of the fact that we're talking about health care as in literally vital, literally life and death. We lose track of the data. I'm very data driven, so I don't come from this from political ideology, because I never thought in 1990 I'd be defending the Heritage Foundation and Stuart Butler's report from 1989, but here I am defending it. Scalia said that young people don't need health care and should not have to buy it. Well, it turns out that for people age 15 to 34, they definitely do need health insurance. I had students before Obamacare who were bankrupt because of medical expenses. A guy got into a car accident, he's in law school, so now he's got his school loans to deal with, and now he's got hospital payments that he can't make, and he had to file a bankruptcy. You would think that student loans are the leading cause of personal bankruptcy. They're not. It's medical debt. 15 to 34-year-old people, their biggest health care expense is unintended, unexpected injury. The second is suicide. The age of onset for most serious mental health illnesses is age 17 to 24. And if they're not adequately treated with health care, and often they go untreated, you can see many of the serious consequences. The third is homicide. The fourth is cancer. The fifth is congenital conditions. Those are all high-ticket items. So while age correlates with health care problems, the young people are not necessarily healthy. And when they do have health issues, they tend to be high-ticket items. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg came out and replied with a lot of this, but it was not a political, ideological discussion. It was statistics from the National Health Interview Survey. This is not economists predicting anything. This is going around and asking people, have you used health care? Have you needed your health insurance? And so again, 99.5% of the people in the country will need to be in the healthcare market. And I'll wrap up by saying, why should I pay for your health care? And why should you pay for mine? So we have a system. It is fragmented. It's not a government takeover. All of the providers are private sector, even Medicaid providers, Medicare providers, they are private sector actors. We are all in the market, so the government traditionally regulates behavior in the market. And so healthcare in some ways is no different from regulating Toyota purchases, but in some ways, in many fundamental ways, it's very different. So if we're going to talk about healthcare, we should talk about healthcare. We shouldn't have 13 white men in a room telling everybody, especially women, that's a whole other 2-hour segment, on how to deal with healthcare insurance. Also, for women, healthcare needs persist throughout your life. So it's not an unexpected thing that you should need, you need annual wellness visits. So anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you so much again for coming. Professors Cherba, Blackman, thank you very much for your time. I know you both have very busy schedules. Unfortunately, Professor Cherba has to run over to main campus for an event, but if anyone has any particular questions for Professor Blackman, he can stay on for like a good 10 more minutes, and if not, then
Oh, you're welcome, Josh. Thank
you're
you.
welcome to head out, get as much of the leftovers
Questions?
as possible. You're good.
What's on your minds?
Oh, you can turn the lights back up too. There you go.
Yeah.
Would you be able to talk about severability and the Texas lawsuit, just kind of like the merits of that
Yeah.
lawsuit?
Let's wait people filter out, then I'll take the questions. I can't do people who are moving around. If you need to go, just go, and I'll save for questions with everyone else.
Grab it. I'll just wait.
How's Gwen Higgins getting for that?
I'm so sorry that
It's actually super easy.
I'm doing it.
I mean, I thought it would be harder.
You want to go over and take a one-on-one? Yeah, if you have questions, come up. I don't think this is going to work. All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh. I'm
Thank
so
you.
sorry I have to.